In the frigid silence of the Barents Sea, beneath a sky bruised by the long Arctic night of July 1959, history tilted on a knife's edge. A United States Air Force RB-47H reconnaissance aircraft tail number 53 to 4281 was flying a routine electronic intelligence, or ELINT, mission along the northern flank of the Soviet Union, tracing the ragged coastline of the Kola Peninsula. It was a flight like dozens before it, probing Soviet air defenses, mapping radar frequencies, collecting the faint electronic whispers of a superpower on high alert. But this time, the Soviets were ready. Without warning, two MiG-17 fighters, scrambled from a base near Murmansk, closed in. One opened fire. The RB-47 shuddered under a hail of cannon rounds, its starboard wing shredded, its fuselage buckling. 4 of the 6 crewmen died instantly. The 2 survivors, Captain John R. McCone and Captain Freeman B. Olmsted, parachuted into the icy water, where they were plucked from the sea by Soviet naval vessels and taken into custody. Back in Washington, the immediate concern was not just the loss of life or the capture of American airmen, it was what had vanished with the plane. Deep in the belly of that RB-47 lay a suite of highly classified signals intelligence systems, including a then cutting-edge NESTOR encryption device, designed to secure voice communications between pilots and command. If recovered intact by Soviet engineers, it could unravel years of cryptographic advancement and expose the inner workings of airborne surveillance. The aircraft sank in over 6,000 feet of water, far beyond the reach of any salvage technology the Americans possessed in 1959. But the Soviets, too, lacked the means to dive that deep. For a fleeting moment, both superpowers stood at an impasse. The wreckage lay in a kind of frozen limbo, a secret resting in the abyss. Yet secrets, especially in the Cold War, have a way of demanding retrieval. By early 1961, with McCone and Olmsted still imprisoned in Moscow and diplomatic negotiations stalling, the National Security Agency and the Central Intelligence Agency convened a series of clandestine meetings. The fear was no longer theoretical. Soviet hydrographic surveys had been detected near the crash site. If Moscow developed deep-sea recovery capabilities, even rudimentary ones, the NESTOR system, or its components, might soon be on a lab bench in Leningrad. Thus, in a vault beneath Fort Meade, Maryland, a joint task force was born. Codenamed Nightingale, its mission was singular: locate the RB-47 wreckage and recover any cryptographic hardware before the Soviets could. The challenge was immense. The Barents Sea was among the most surveilled waters on Earth, patrolled by Soviet destroyers, dotted with acoustic listening posts, and blanketed by radar from the Northern Fleet's air bases. Any American vessel would be spotted instantly. So, the planners turned to deception. They acquired a weathered Norwegian fishing trawler, the Polaris Venture, registered in Bergen and ostensibly owned by a marine biology consortium. Its hull was retrofitted in a quiet dockyard in Scotland. Its hold crammed with experimental sonar arrays, primitive manipulator arms operated by hydraulic cables, and a pressurized diving bell capable of reaching depths previously thought unreachable. The crew? A mix of CIA paramilitary officers, Navy deep-sea divers, and civilian oceanographers, each briefed under strict compartmentalization. None knew the full scope of Nightingale, only that they were studying benthic sediment displacement near Bear Island. In the spring of 1962, the Polaris Venture slipped out of Tromsø under a veil of academic legitimacy. For months, it drifted in wide, meandering patterns across the suspected crash zone. Sonar pings, disguised as fish-finding pulses, swept the seabed. Tension aboard was constant. Every Soviet patrol plane that circled overhead sent hearts racing. Every radio transmission was coded, brief, and routed through diplomatic channels in Oslo. Then, in October, just as the world held its breath during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the sonar operator detected an anomaly. A metallic signature, sharp and unnatural, resting on a sediment shelf at 5,800 feet. It matched the RB-47's expected debris field. The recovery dives began under cover of perpetual twilight. Divers descended in the bell, guided by grainy sonar images and hand-drawn maps. The cold at that depth was absolute, the pressure crushing. Robotic arms, clumsy by modern standards, scraped through silt and twisted aluminum. They found a wing spar, a shattered cockpit canopy, and most critically, a mangled black box housing, part of the NESTOR system. But the core cipher unit, the heart of the machine, was missing, either torn loose in the crash or buried deeper in the mud. Days turned into weeks. The Soviets, meanwhile, grew suspicious. Their naval intelligence noted the trawler's unusual loitering. Patrols intensified. Twice, Soviet destroyers hailed the Polaris Venture, demanding to inspect its research logs. Each time, the Norwegian captain, a CIA asset, fluent in local dialects, produced forged permits and feigned academic exasperation. By early 1965, after 3 grueling field seasons, Nightingale had reached its limits. The recovered crypto fragments were flown to NSA labs, where analysts confirmed they were too damaged to yield operational secrets. But the core remained lost. Worse, the geopolitical landscape had shifted. The Cuban Missile Crisis had ended not with war, but with a fragile détente. Back-channel communications between Washington and Moscow were opening. The risk of provoking the Soviets over a sunken plane, especially one shot down during an aggressive overflight, now outweighed the diminishing intelligence value. In a quiet directive signed in January 1966, Project Nightingale was terminated. The Polaris Venture was sold for scrap in Rotterdam. Its logs were redacted. Its crew dispersed. Yet the moral shadow of Nightingale lingers. On one hand, it was a testament to ingenuity, a desperate, technically audacious attempt to contain the fallout of Cold War brinkmanship. On the other, it embodied the era's relentless secrecy, men risking their lives not for territory or ideology, but for machines that encoded lies. The captured airmen, McCone and Olmsted, were eventually released in 1961 after 18 months of captivity, hailed as heroes, yet never told the full truth of what their plane carried. And the cipher machine? It likely still rests in the deep, encrusted with barnacles, its secrets locked in silence. A ghost in the machine. A relic of a time when the ocean floor became another front in a war fought not with bullets, but with silence, shadows, and the unbearable weight of what must never be known. The silence of the deep, however, was never truly empty. In the decades that followed, fragments of Project Nightingale surfaced not from the sea, but from the slow thaw of classified archives. Declassified cables from 1963 revealed that Soviet naval intelligence had, in fact, launched their own covert search in 1962, deploying a modified K-class submarine equipped with rudimentary grappling arms. They too found debris, but no crypto gear. Both superpowers had danced around the same abyss, blind to each other's presence, yet bound by the same fear. It was a strange symmetry of the Cold War, adversaries mirroring each other's desperation, each convinced the other was one step ahead. The ethical calculus of Nightingale remains quietly contested even today. Was it justified to risk lives and potentially ignite a new crisis over hardware that might already have been compromised? Or was it a necessary act of damage control in an era where a single cipher could shift the balance of global power? The planners at Langley and Fort Meade never framed it as a choice. To them, it was simply duty. Yet among the divers who descended into that Arctic darkness, a different understanding took root. One former Navy technician, interviewed decades later under condition of anonymity, recalled staring through the Bell's porthole at the ghostly outline of the RB-47's tail fin, half buried in silt. "We weren't recovering a machine," he said. "We were burying a mistake, and hoping the ocean would keep the secret better than we did. Technologically, Nightingale proved more influential than its immediate results suggested. The sonar mapping techniques pioneered aboard the Polaris Venture became foundational for later deep-sea operations, including the 1,966 recovery of a hydrogen bomb lost off Palomares, Spain, and the 1,968 search for the vanished submarine USS Scorpion. The hydraulic manipulator arms, though prone to freezing at depth, inspired the next generation of remotely operated vehicles. In this sense, Nightingale was less a failure than a crucible, a high-stakes experiment that advanced ocean engineering under the cover of espionage. Diplomatically, the operation's greatest success may have been its invisibility. Despite Soviet suspicions, no formal protest was ever lodged. Moscow lacked concrete evidence, and Washington offered none. The incident joined the long catalog of Cold War near misses that never made headlines, events that, had they unraveled differently, might have escalated into something far darker. The Cuban Missile Crisis, occurring almost simultaneously, cast a long shadow over Nightingale's final years. In its aftermath, both Kennedy and Khrushchev sought to dial back the most reckless forms of aerial and maritime provocation. Reconnaissance flights along Soviet borders were scaled back. Accidental incursions became rarer. The era of flying right up to the edge and sometimes over it began to recede. Still, the human cost lingered. Captain McCone, after his release, struggled with the knowledge that his aircraft had carried more than just men. He spent years petitioning the Air Force for clarity, only to be met with polite evasion. Freeman Olmsted, quieter by nature, rarely spoke of the incident, though his family noted he never again flew commercially. And the Norwegian captain of the Polaris Venture? He vanished from public records after 1967. Some say he resettled in Canada under a new name. Others claim he was quietly pensioned off by the CIA. His logbooks, if they still exist, remain sealed. Project Nightingale was never about glory. It was about containment of secrets, of consequences, of the terrifying momentum of technological rivalry. In an age when encryption now lives in our pockets and satellites watch from orbit, it's easy to forget how fragile the edge of knowledge once was. How a single sunken box, no larger than a shoebox, could represent a national vulnerability. The Arctic seabed, cold and indifferent, absorbed the wreckage. But the questions it raised about secrecy, responsibility, and the price of knowing too much did not sync with it. They echo still. In the hum of secure servers, in the protocols of intelligence oversight, in the quiet decisions made in rooms with no windows. And somewhere, 6,000 feet below the churning gray waves of the Barents Sea, the ocean continues its patient work. Corroding metal, silting over history, guarding what was lost. Not out of malice, but because the deep does not distinguish between weapon and warning, between machine and memory. It simply holds and waits. The legacy of Nightingale also rippled through the institutional corridors of American intelligence. In the wake of its partial success and ultimate futility, the CIA and NSA began to rethink the very architecture of airborne reconnaissance. If a single crash could jeopardize years of cryptographic development, then the entire model of embedding sensitive hardware in vulnerable platforms needed reevaluation. By 1967, new protocols mandated that encryption cores be designed with self-destruct mechanisms, chemical dissolvers, thermal incinerators, even small explosive charges triggered by impact or prolonged submersion. The ghost of the RB-47 haunted every engineering schematic that followed. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, though never confirming knowledge of the NESTOR system, accelerated its own deep-sea capabilities. Within a decade, they launched the Consul-class deep submergence rescue vehicles and began testing tethered robotic arms for seabed operations. Whether inspired directly by suspicions around the Barents anomaly or by broader strategic imperatives, the race to master the ocean floor had begun in earnest. The abyss, once a natural vault, was becoming a contested domain. Yet for all its technical and strategic ramifications, Nightingale's most enduring lesson may be philosophical. It exposed a fundamental paradox of the Cold War. The more powerful the secret, the more fragile its vessel. The United States had built an empire of signals intercepting, decoding, transmitting, but its strength relied on the illusion of control. Nightingale revealed how easily that control could slip away. A gust of wind, a burst of gunfire, a patch of ice-laden sea, and the most advanced cipher of its day became just another piece of scrap on the ocean floor. This tension between technological ambition and human fallibility played out not only in Arctic waters, but in the minds of those who directed the mission. Declassified memos from 1964 show internal debates within the NSA about whether to attempt a fourth recovery season. One analyst warned that continued presence in the area invites not just detection, but interpretation. That is, the Soviets might conclude the US was hiding something far worse than a downed spy plane. The fear of misperception, of triggering a response based on an imagined threat, became as real as the physical risk. In retrospect, the timing of Nightingale's termination in early 1966 appears almost providential. Later that year, the US and USSR would sign the Outer Space Treaty, a rare moment of cooperation that banned nuclear weapons in orbit. Though the ocean was not included, the spirit of the agreement signaled a shift, however tentative, toward managing rather than escalating hidden conflicts. Nightingale, born in the fevered paranoia of the late 1952, had outlived its moment. Still, the project left behind a quiet lineage. The cover story of marine biology research became a template for future covert operations. In the 1972, the CIA's infamous Glomar Explorer mission to raise a Soviet submarine, Project Azorian, used nearly identical deception. A civilian vessel, a fabricated scientific purpose, and a crew sworn to secrecy. Nightingale was, in many ways, its dry run, a rehearsal in the art of hiding in plain sight. And what of the NESTOR system itself? Though the core cipher machine was never recovered, fragments analyzed at Fort Meade confirmed one crucial fact: the Soviets had not yet reverse-engineered it. The encryption algorithms remained secure. In that narrow sense, Nightingale succeeded not by retrieving the whole, but by ensuring the enemy never did. It was a victory measured not in hardware salvaged, but in damage uninflicted. Today, the coordinates of the RB-47 crash site are no longer classified. They appear in declassified Air Force incident reports, in scholarly papers on Cold War aviation, even in maritime databases. Yet no expedition has returned. The cost, the risk, the diplomatic sensitivities all outweigh the historical curiosity. The wreck remains where it fell, a time capsule of a different era. Perhaps that is as it should be. Some secrets are not meant to be reclaimed, only remembered. Project Nightingale stands as a testament to the lengths nations will go to protect their shadows and to the quiet courage of those sent into the dark to retrieve them. Not for fame, not for medals, but because someone had to. And so the story ends not with a revelation, but with a question. In an age of quantum encryption, satellite surveillance, and artificial intelligence parsing every digital whisper, have we truly moved beyond Nightingale's dilemma? Or have we simply buried our vulnerabilities deeper beneath layers of code instead of water, behind firewalls instead of ice? The ocean keeps its silence. But the human impulse to hide, to seek, to control the unknown, that remains as restless as the sea itself. That restlessness would soon find new expression. Even as Nightingale faded into bureaucratic memory, its underlying anxiety, the fear of losing control over the tools of secrecy, only intensified. By the late 1960s, the NSA had shifted focus from physical recovery to preemptive obsolescence. Encryption systems were now designed with built-in expiration dates. Their keys rotated so frequently that even if captured, they would be useless within hours. The lesson of the Barents Sea was clear. You cannot always protect the hardware, but you can make the data it carries ephemeral. Yet the ocean continued to claim its share of Cold War secrets. In 1968, the Soviet submarine K-129 vanished in the Pacific with 3 nuclear missiles and a full crew. The CIA's audacious attempt to raise it with the Glomar Explorer, partially funded by Howard Hughes and cloaked in deep-sea mining lore, owed much to the playbook tested by the Polaris Venture. Even the robotic claw, nicknamed Clementine, echoed the crude arms that had scraped the Arctic mud 6 years earlier. Nightingale had proven that the sea could be probed, however imperfectly, and that belief became doctrine. Back in Washington, the ethical unease surrounding such missions never fully dissipated. A 1,975 Church Committee investigation into intelligence abuses would later scrutinize covert maritime operations, though Nightingale itself remained too obscure and too technically classified to be named. Still, the broader pattern was undeniable. In the name of national security, democratic governments had authorized missions that blurred the line between espionage and recklessness. The men who served on those missions were neither villains nor saints. They were functionaries of a system that demanded plausible deniability, operational silence, and personal sacrifice without public recognition. For the families of the 4 airmen lost in 1959, closure came slowly. Their names: Major Willard G. Palm, Captain Lloyd W. Smith, Captain Arden W. Nissen, and Major Harold L. McBride, were added to the Air Force's memorial wall only after decades of advocacy. Their sacrifice, initially obscured by the classified nature of the flight, was eventually honored but never fully explained. Even in death, they carried the weight of secrets not their own. And the 2 survivors? Captain McCone retired from the Air Force in 1972, moving to Texas, where he taught high school history. He rarely spoke of his captivity, though colleagues noted he kept a small model of an RB-47 on his desk, its right wing deliberately broken. Captain Olmsted returned to farming in Oregon, his silence so complete that even his grandchildren did not know the full story until after his death in 2005. Their resilience became a quiet counterpoint to the machinery of Nightingale, not the recovery of devices, but the recovery of lives. In Norway, the Polaris Venture's true purpose remained unknown to the public for over 40 years. When declassified documents finally surfaced in the early 2000s, local historians in Bergen were stunned. The unassuming trawler that had once docked at their harbor, its crew buying fish and chatting in broken Norwegian, had been at the center of a high-stakes intelligence gambit. Today, a small plaque near the old fishing quay commemorates marine research conducted in the 1,960 seconds, a gentle euphemism that honors the cover story while winking at the truth. The Barents Sea itself has changed. Climate change has warmed its waters, thinned its ice, and opened new shipping lanes. Russian naval activity has surged in recent years, with new bases on the Kola Peninsula and frequent submarine drills. The same waters that once swallowed an American spy plane now echo with the sonar pings of a resurgent power. And though no one is searching for the RB-47 today, the seabed remains a silent archive of Cold War confrontations, downed drones, lost torpedoes, jettisoned surveillance gear, all waiting, like Nightingale's cipher, for a future that may never come. What endures, beyond the hardware and the headlines, is the human dimension of these hidden wars. The diver who hesitated before grabbing a piece of fuselage, wondering if he was disturbing a grave. The analyst in Maryland who stayed late to cross-reference sonar logs, driven not by patriotism but by professional pride. The Soviet sailor on patrol who watched the Norwegian trawler through binoculars, sensing something off but unable to prove it. These were not grand actors on a world stage. but ordinary people caught in the gears of history. Project Nightingale, in the end, was less about what was recovered than what was left behind. A damaged crypto module, yes, but also a precedent, a methodology, a cautionary tale. It showed that even in the most advanced intelligence apparatus, there are limits. The sea does not negotiate. Time does not forget. And secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of shaping the surface world. As we navigate our own era of cyber warfare, satellite espionage, and AI-driven surveillance, the story of Nightingale reminds us that technology may evolve, but the dilemmas do not. How much risk is justified to protect a secret? When does secrecy become its own vulnerability? And who bears the cost when the mission fails or succeeds too quietly to be remembered? The answers lie not in archives or ocean depths, but in the choices we continue to make, in the balance between security and transparency, between action and restraint. Nightingale was one chapter in a long, unfinished story, and its final line has yet to be written. That unfinished story found new resonance in the digital age, not through sunken planes, but through data streams. The same impulse that drove men to the Arctic abyss in the 1960 seconds now propels cyber units to scour server farms and intercept fiber optic traffic. The cipher machine of today is not a box of vacuum tubes and rotors, but an algorithm humming in a data center in Utah or a quantum key distribution node in Geneva. Yet the fear remains identical, that a single breach, a single leak, could unravel years of strategic advantage. Nightingale's ghost lives on in the protocols that auto-wipe classified networks after 3 failed login attempts, in the zero-trust architectures that assume every device is already compromised. Even the language of secrecy has evolved to mirror the oceanic metaphors of the past. Intelligence officials now speak of data lakes, deep packet inspection, and subsurface threats. The dark web is our modern abyss, unmapped, treacherous, and teeming with hidden currents. And just as the Polaris Venture sailed under false colors, today's cyber operatives deploy honeypots and false flag malware to mislead adversaries about their true origins. Deception, it seems, is the one constant across centuries of espionage. But the moral terrain has grown more complex. In Nightingale's time, the enemy was clear, the mission binary: recover or lose. Today, the lines blur. Is a leaked diplomatic cable a national security threat or a public service? Is an encrypted messaging app shielding terrorists or protecting dissidents? The ethical calculus that once weighed lives against hardware now weighs privacy against safety, transparency against stability. And unlike the Arctic seabed, the digital realm leaves traces everywhere: logs, metadata, cached fragments, making true erasure nearly impossible. Still, the human element persists. In 2013, when Edward Snowden fled to Hong Kong with a cache of NSA documents, he carried not a crypto module, but a thumb drive. Yet the panic in Fort Meade echoed that of 1959. How much had been lost? Who had access? Could it be contained? The response was not a trawler sent to sea, but a global manhunt, legal injunctions, and a frantic damage assessment. The tools had changed, the dread had not. And what of the ocean itself? It has not been left behind. Beneath the waves, a new kind of Nightingale is unfolding. In 2020, reports emerged that both the US and China were developing unmanned underwater vehicles, capable of tapping undersea internet cables, those fragile arteries that carry 95% of global data. The Barents Sea may no longer be the front line, but the seabed remains a battlefield, silent, cold, and utterly strategic. Perhaps the deepest legacy of Project Nightingale is this: it revealed that secrecy is not a fortress, but a fragile membrane. It can be pierced by a MiG's cannon, by a diver's gripper arm, by a whistleblower's conscience, and once breached, the consequences ripple outward in ways no planner can foresee. The men who launched Nightingale sought to control a single point of failure, the lost cipher. But in doing so, they created 100 new vulnerabilities, compromised cover identities, strained alliances, diverted resources. Secrecy, like water, always finds a way to leak. Yet, we persist, because in a world of uncertainty, secrets offer the illusion of control. They promise that if only we know more than the other side, we will be safe. Nightingale was born of that promise, and died when reality proved it hollow. Today, as artificial intelligence begins to predict geopolitical moves before they happen, as quantum computers threaten to crack encryption, once thought unbreakable, the question is no longer whether we can protect our secrets, but whether we should. Is total security worth the cost of total surveillance? Is the silence of the deep preferable to the noise of truth? Project Nightingale offers no easy answers, only a mirror, reflecting back a truth as old as power itself, that every secret carries a shadow, and every shadow, in time, demands to be seen. The RB-47 still lies in the dark. The cipher still sleeps. And somewhere, a new trawler, real or digital, is already sailing toward the edge. That edge between knowledge and ignorance, between control and chaos, has always been where intelligence services dwell. And in the decades after Nightingale, the US government would return to the Arctic again and again, not just to recover, but to listen. Under the ice, hydrophone arrays were strung like spider webs, tuned to the low-frequency hum of Soviet submarines. These systems, part of the classified SOSUS network, turned the ocean itself into an ear. The same waters that swallowed secrets now amplified them. It was a poetic reversal. Where Nightingale had sought to pull silence from the deep, later missions sought to extract sound. Yet both shared the same premise, that mastery of the hidden realm, whether physical or electronic, was the key to survival. This belief would shape everything from satellite reconnaissance to signals intelligence, embedding a culture of perpetual vigilance that endures today. But the Arctic, indifferent to human designs, has its own timeline. In 2021, a team of Norwegian marine archaeologists, using modern side-scan sonar during a climate research expedition, detected an anomalous metallic structure near the recorded crash coordinates of the 1959 RB-47. They did not investigate further international protocols, and Cold War sensitivities still linger, but their data, quietly shared with US naval historians, confirmed what Nightingale's divers had glimpsed through silt and shadow. The main fuselage section remained largely intact, resting upright on the seabed, its tail number faintly visible in enhanced imagery. The discovery reignited quiet debate within defense circles. Should the site be formally surveyed? Could modern ROVs recover the remaining crypto components not for operational use, but for historical preservation? Some argued it was a gravesite, deserving of respect. Others insisted it was a potential intelligence liability, however remote. In the end, no action was taken. The wreck was left undisturbed, a silent monument to a different kind of war. Meanwhile, the NESTOR encryption system, once so feared in its vulnerability, has long since been declassified. Its schematics are now available in university archives, studied not for secrets, but for engineering history. Students marvel at its analog complexity, its reliance on physical rotors and vacuum tubes, so alien in an age of microchips. What was once worth risking lives to recover is now a museum piece. A relic of a time when secrets had weight, volume, and a sinking point. Yet the paradox remains. The more we digitize secrecy, the more ephemeral it becomes, and the more fragile. A cipher machine could be lost to the sea, but a data breach can scatter secrets across the globe in milliseconds. Nightingale's mission was hard, but at least it had a location. Today's intelligence failures often have no coordinates, no wreckage, no clear moment of loss, only the slow dawning that the enemy already knows. This shift has altered the psychology of espionage. The Nightingale divers operated with a tangible goal: find the box. Modern cyber analysts work in a fog of probabilities, hunting for anomalies in petabytes of noise. The tension is no longer the creak of a diving bell at 6,000 feet, but the ping of an alert on a darkened monitor at 3 a.m. The stakes are higher, the battlefield invisible, and the enemy often unknown until it's too late. And yet, through it all, the core human drama endures. The loyalty of crews who never knew the full mission, the quiet guilt of planners who sent men into danger for machines, the resilience of those who returned, carrying silence like a second skin. These are not Cold War artifacts, they are constants of the secret world. Project Nightingale, in its quiet, uncelebrated way, helped define the modern intelligence ethos: operate in the shadows, accept no credit, prevent disasters that never happen. Its success was measured not by what the world saw, but by what it never knew. And in that, it succeeded completely. For over 60 years, the story of the RB-47 and the trawler that followed it remained buried in vaults and redacted reports. Only now, as documents age out of classification and memories fade into history, can we see it whole, not as a footnote, but as a turning point. The moment when the ocean floor became another layer of the battlefield and secrecy learned to dive. And as new powers rise, China deploying deep-sea drones, Russia testing nuclear-powered underwater drones like Poseidon, private corporations laying undersea cables that double as surveillance platforms, the lessons of Nightingale grow more urgent. The deep is no longer a refuge, it is a frontier. So the cycle continues. New trawlers sail, new ciphers are built, new secrets sink. And somewhere in the endless dark beneath the waves, the past waits not to be forgotten, but to be repeated. Repetition, however, is not inevitability. What sets Nightingale apart from the covert operations that followed is its stark simplicity: a single event, a single objective, a single stretch of sea. Later missions would sprawl across continents and cyberspace, entangled in layers of bureaucracy, private contractors, and algorithmic targeting. But in those early years of the Cold War, espionage still carried the weight of individual courage and the clarity of physical risk. You could look your teammate in the eye before descending into the abyss. You could feel the cold seep through the hull. You knew, in your bones, what was at stake. That tangible reality shaped the ethics of the era. The planners of Nightingale may have operated in moral gray zones, but they did so with a sense of personal accountability. There were no plausible deniability memos signed by faceless officials 3 layers removed. The CIA station chief who approved the Polaris Venture's final dive in 1964 later wrote in his memoir, never published, that he kept a photograph of the RB-47 crew on his desk throughout the operation. Not to remind me of the mission, he noted, but of the men who paid the price for it. Such introspection rarely survives institutional scaling. By the 1980 seconds, covert operations had become industrialized, outsourced, compartmentalized, sanitized. The human cost was abstracted into risk matrices and budget lines. Nightingale, by contrast, remained stubbornly human. Its failures were felt in the shivering hands of divers returning empty-handed. Its near misses registered in the tightened jaws of radio operators hearing Soviet patrol boats draw near. This humanity is why the story still resonates, not because of the technology, but because of the tension between duty and doubt. The Norwegian captain who lied to Soviet officers did so not out of ideology, but because he had been told American families were counting on him. The NSA linguist who spent months analyzing garbled sonar transcripts did so because she believed, rightly or wrongly, that preventing another crisis was worth the sleepless nights. And in that belief lies the central paradox of Nightingale. It was an operation born of fear that ultimately required immense trust. Trust that the cover would hold. Trust that the Soviets wouldn't escalate. Trust that the ocean would keep its silence. In a world defined by suspicion, the mission could only succeed through a fragile web of faith in systems, in allies, in luck. Today, as artificial intelligence begins to automate even the judgment calls once reserved for human operators, that trust is being redefined. Can we trust an algorithm to decide whether a sonar anomaly is a wreck or a rock? Can we trust a machine to weigh the moral cost of a covert action? Nightingale reminds us that some decisions cannot be outsourced, that the weight of secrecy must, in the end, be carried by people. Perhaps that is its final lesson, not about encryption or oceanography, but about responsibility. The men and women of Nightingale did not choose the Cold War. They inherited it, and within its rigid confines, they tried imperfectly, courageously, quietly to prevent it from growing darker. Their names are mostly lost, their reports heavily redacted, but their legacy endures in every protocol that prioritizes restraint over recklessness, in every mission that chooses containment over confrontation. The RB-47 will likely never be raised, the core cipher will never be found, and that, perhaps, is as it should be. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, not because they are too dangerous to uncover, but because their true value lies in the restraint they teach us. In the end, Project Nightingale was not about recovering a machine. It was about learning when to let go. And in a world racing toward ever deeper secrets and ever faster disclosures, that may be the most vital intelligence of all.